Hello and welcome to the TBG Real Estate Podcast, where we connect you with some of the most innovative and exciting real estate leaders today. We will show you that there are numerous paths to a successful career in the real estate industry, and that some of your greatest missteps can be turned into your greatest triumphs. Without further ado, here's the head of TBG Real Estate, Chris Papa.
All right, folks, welcome to this episode of the TBG Real Estate Podcast. My name is Chris Papa from TBG Real Estate. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we have a very special guest and a good friend of mine, Mr. Nikesh Kalra. Nikesh is the Chief Strategy Officer at iboss. Hello, Nikesh.
Afternoon, Chris.
What's happening?
Well, living the dream under the circumstances.
So iboss is like a network security firm, correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Why are you on a real estate podcast? That's what we're going to find out.
We're going to figure that out, right?
So Nikesh is a personal friend of mine. I've known him for many years. He's worked at a number of different firms and in the technology space. And he always said that his job related heavily to real estate. And he explained to me why. And I was like, oh man. And now with the COVID crisis and everyone working from home, it made a lot more sense to me. And we can kind of explore how that is, his job is changing the way we view real estate. So anyhow, why don't you go in a little bit what you're doing now, what's iboss, and kind of explain what your role there is.
Sure. The company itself has a technology service for security around networking, which is for remote access, right? So while you and I are now working from home, or even when we weren't working from home, we were carrying our mobile devices around, potentially accessing our company's resources in the cloud or in the company offices. And that network connection itself needs to be secured. So the internet itself on its own in vanilla form is very prone to hacking, as we've been reading about for the last several years. So securing that connection between your mobile device or the laptops that we're on right now and whatever resources we're using in the background, whether they're company owned or some software as a service resource like Box.com or Salesforce or Office 365, that connection itself needs to be secured. So obviously we've been reading and hearing about this a lot in the era of COVID. This is this was a problem set and a technology opportunity that's existed well before. I think now it's kind of much more at the surface level and a much more of a household conversation than the pre-COVID era.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's working from home. It seems to be like, I mean, I'm in real estate, so I hear about how the world's going to change after this, as far as like people going into the actual office. Like it's going to be less. And like, I think we've realized that a lot of companies don't need people in the office space. They can work from home, which is going to save companies a lot of money from leasing office space. That could hurt office landlords. But with that comes the need for the extra kind of what you do, right? Kind of like you're the connection between like the home office and the rest of the office, right? Basically.
Absolutely. You think about the internet as a giant connection mechanism, right? In the physical world, we had roads, right? Roads, freeways, et cetera, that connected, one place to another, whether it was your home to your office, your home to a store, or, an office to another office. And in the digital world, the internet is the connector between people, not necessarily physical offices, but between applications that we use, between data that we need, and between people that want to communicate. And so in the physical world, you had to make lots of investments in roads and highways. Security was less of an issue, but it's definitely there, right? You have the police, the highway patrol, et cetera, different types of security. And in the digital world, you also need security to make sure that people aren't accessing things that they shouldn't be, or that the right people have access to the right things and in a performant way. So there's a lot of parallels between the two. This could have just like roads, right? If we had great public transportation, right? If we had super high-speed rails between different parts of the Bay Area, for example, or New York does have great transportation, and so you get a little bit more flattening of pricing across different parts of the region that are highly interconnected. When they're not, then you end up having to want to be close to those places, and that's what drives pricing up, right? And so if you have great public transportation, people can live or work far away from each other and still get to those places quickly. It's very, very similar in the digital world. In the future world, if you're not reporting into a physical office, you could live anywhere as long as there's great connectivity, great internet service, and that internet service is secure.
Gotcha. And so since COVID happened, it feels like, has the internet been overloaded? Has your demand for your services gone up, I imagine?
It has. In fact, the last few companies I've worked for, the demand for all of our services has gone up. So when you and I first met, Chris, I think I was working at a company called Equinix, which provides the physical infrastructure that is at the backbone of the internet itself. So in fact, the more internet usage there is, the demand for Equinix services goes up. Their stock is at an all-time high. Literally in its 20 plus year history, it is an all-time high because we're using more internet services, more servers and computer infrastructure are going inside to their buildings. They are in fact a REIT, so I'm sure you're familiar with the company, and demand continues to rise for their service. The last company I was at, Palo Alto Networks, also is doing very well, and demand for their products is very high. They're in the network security space also, and iboss, our demand has gone through the roof for the exact same reasons, right? The more internet we use, the more security implications there are. We've been reading about Zoom quite extensively, which is now a household word. There's a lot of security issues that have been surfaced around Zoom. Some of them are user related in configuration, and some of them are things that Zoom is working on. Our products and services at iboss are part of the solution to better security for using all of these types of collaboration and connection applications.
That's amazing. Most of my guests, I'm pretty confident. When I can talk, I can go back and forth with them about what we're talking about. You, I just want to learn. So, can we just start from? You're an amazing guy. I know that. Why don't we let everyone know that? Like, where'd you grow up? How'd you kind of get into this business, and how'd you grow through your career?
Yeah, I had it easy, actually, Chris. I was born and raised in the Bay Area to a dad who was in technology already. So I had kind of the gene, should we say, from day one. And I was a tinkerer when I was a kid. I was a self-proclaimed nerd back when nerds were not cool. Right now, it's like nerds are like the cool kids. I wish I had gone to school in the current era. That would have been a different high school and primary school experience. In any case, I was a bookworm. I loved books. I loved technology. I loved just tinkering and exploring about how stuff works. Like, I'm very much a how stuff works. I used to rip apart computers and see the insides, and I think that bug just stayed with me. And I, part of it was just the DNA. Part of it was being in the right zip code. I think we forget how important the hereditary value of location is. Speaking of real estate, I was born in a technology zip code, right? So that just puts you in an ecosystem. You're from New York, right? If you're in New York, there's a certain set of sectors that you gravitate towards, and it's, I think, the same thing in Silicon Valley. Not that everybody here is in tech, but there's a gravitational pull, and that coupled with my natural curiosity kind of led me there. Interestingly enough, in my university studies, I did not study tech. I studied more business-oriented topics, but those things converged when I started working in the Valley post grad, and so I think it's very easy to think that everything is in your life is like very well put together and linear. You've seen plenty of those memes that float around about what success and what life looks like, and it's kind of a bunch of zigzags around. I have always been in the internet infrastructure space. I am completely fascinated and enamored with the idea of connections, right? How do you connect people? How do you connect ideas? How do you connect money? How do you get something from one place to another? The idea of distribution and how stuff works. So that naturally kind of led me into a very interesting path that in fact combines the ideas of real estate and technology.
Did you ever think that you'd be connected with real estate? In the technology world, it's such did you have an interest in real estate at all, or just technology? You kind of just realized that how important, I guess technology covers all of us, but a lot of areas of life, but did you realize, you worked for a REIT, right? So it was kind of like you were inside of a real estate company.
Yeah, it was. It definitely was. In fact, Equinix became a REIT while I was there. I think I joined the company in 2013, and maybe at the end of 2014 or beginning of 2015 was when the official conversion process happened. we have hindsight bias. You look back in your career and your life, you're like, of course, the lineology makes sense. The reality is you can't forecast these things. And so did I think or deliberately plan on the convergence of real estate and technology? No. But the reality is it was probably bound to happen sooner or later. Incidentally, I grew up in a household that was also real estate investors. So my father was a real estate investor here in the Bay Area and still is. And so I had exposure to real estate, residential investing, property management and maintenance. And I'm not sure I found it nearly as fascinating as the tech side of it, but I started catching that bug early. And I think over time, I saw the convergence of these things. Like we've always been trying to move stuff around since the beginning of time, right? Like I have water in one place, I need to get it to another place. I have grains or farms or crops in one place, I need to get it to another place. And in the old world, like if you go back far enough in time, the people had to move, right? You had to move to get to more water. And then over time, we developed transportation technology to move stuff around, right? Aqueducts and carts with horses pulling them around. And in some sense, the oversimplified version of this is like the internet is a very fascinating and complex way of moving around data and other things. And now the internet kind of has grown arms and legs and physicality, right? If I want to get groceries delivered, I just order it. Like it's a giant remote control.
Yeah.
And so I think the convergence was bound to happen in my life. I'm glad to be part of it. Not fully planned, right? But well adapted. Like I think when opportunities arise, I start seeing where those convergences happen and where there's opportunity and try to take them.
How has this real estate and technology changed in your business since you started many years ago?
Oh man, I think a lot of things lead back to just the growth and proliferation and improvements of the internet itself, right? The internet, the Al Gore invented internet is more than a couple of decades old. By the way, I love the guy.
Good old Al.
What he's done. Yeah, it's funny. We all make fun of it now because it is funny, but his contribution to pushing that initiative into the public domain is remarkable. And in fact, will have one of the most lasting impacts on society and humanity, possibly forever, right? So this idea of digital connections and the pervasiveness, right? We all used to dial up on modems. We had these brick handheld cell phones, I think in the 90s, late 90s. And think about it now. Like now we have super high speed connections, both wired into physical domains like our homes or our offices. And the quality of wireless technology is absolutely incredible and continuing to get better, right? 5G is here and improving, and at a cost which is actually very, very affordable. I think while costs, we always want them to be lower, the reality is if you think about the magic of what's actually happening in the air, like we're sending this video right now between the two of us through the air, like it's magic for most people. Even for me, like, and I have a decent understanding of how the underlying technology actually works. Decent, not great. It's very, very, very complicated. We live in a world where we take so much of this for granted. If you go and turn on the hot water tap in your home, like, can you explain where the hot water is coming from and how it's getting hot, right? Like that's just water, right? Yeah. And that's a very complex, important piece of infrastructure, just like the internet. So I think that's been the number one driver of technology advancement from my perspective. There's a lot of other important things, the cost and availability of silicon, right? So semiconductor chips and the chips that go into our computers and our cell phones, that's another huge dimension of this, which is the compute power, right? That is available at our disposal. What's really interesting is both of those things, silicon and internet, a lot of them go back to sand, right? Because the sand that is turned into glass is what goes into the fiber cables that connect most of the world. And the sand that's converted into silicon that goes into the computer chips is what a lot of the compute power is derived from. So it's all this stuff rolls back to sand. There's a great book on, I think, some of the I'm looking at my book list here, which is the sort of top 20 inventions that have impacted society over the last 100 or 200 years, and definitely it goes back to this idea of sand and our ability to convert these things into technology. It's just amazing. So those two things have probably had the greatest impact, I think, on the evolution of technology, and a lot of things have happened because of that: software, cloud, things that you hear about. My dad was in the storage business, right? So hard drives, when people still knew what hard drives were. And if you think about what in the 70s and 80s being in that industry, he used to tell me that at that time, 1 megabyte was the size of a dishwasher, right? And now we can get like 100 gigabytes or more into our cell phones. And I think in industrial or enterprise grade scale, you can get 100 gigs down to like the size of coins. I mean, it's really amazing. And for reference, 1 gig is 1,000 megs. So like 100,000 times the amount of data into, something that you can hold in your hand versus a dishwasher, right?
How has this connectivity like physically changed our landscape? I mean, we got data centers out in who knows where, but like, is it changing the way we construct our towns and our cities? And where do we put all these towers? And they're just flying through the air, but it's flying from one thing to another. It's got to be connected somewhere, right? I mean, how is that being changed?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So there are lots of components to this value chain. There are the towers that have the antennas that connect your wireless signals. Those are sprinkled throughout the world. With 5G coming, we're going to need more of those towers for more devices and more connections, right? There's a bunch of what's called IoT, Internet of Things, like your Amazon Echo or your Nest device, your cameras in your home, your connected microwave, which Amazon just announced. Then those things eventually have to connect back to a set of wires, right? So from a tower, you can go from tower to tower, or from a tower, it goes to a wire or a fiber cable, which is buried under the ground. That fiber cable eventually goes to a physical building that houses a bunch of servers or storage devices, right? So within those buildings, those data centers, again, this is the business that Equinix was in, and there's a bunch of other companies that are in this business as well. In that, you have the servers that connect you to Facebook, that connect you to this application that we're using right now, Squadcast, wherever that might be living, to LinkedIn, to Yahoo, to Google, to all of the other services that we're starting to use. Zoom, right? Zoom is in there as well. And in some cases also just connect our phone calls, right? So if we're using point to point, like if we are just calling each other on a phone, that essentially creates a connection between you and I. If we're calling each other on, say, WhatsApp or Zoom or some other unified communications tool, it goes to their servers. Their servers then bind us to in a connection, somewhere, whether that's in, here, since we're both here in Silicon Valley locally, or if one of us was, if you were in New York, then it would establish connections between their own sets of servers across the country, and then finally connect back to you. This is kind of there's a great book that's called Tubes for anybody that's interested in figuring out or learning the basics. Yeah, Tubes, the basics of how the internet works and how all of our carriers like Verizon and AT&T and CenturyLink and Comcast kind of all mesh with one another. And that was the original business model of Equinix, was bringing together all of these different telecom companies so they could connect their, at the time, wires together, and now wireless towers as well, so that we could effectively create a giant internetworking mesh. Again, the more you do this, the more connections you have, the more security risks there are in places that an attack can occur or start from. So while it wasn't designed with security in mind from the very beginning, a lot of the new endeavors are around securing both the existing internet networks and the emerging networks, so that when you and I have a discussion like this, that you can't get infiltrated or Zoom bombed, as you've been hearing about, or essentially like spied on. Right, so security comes in a couple forms: the privacy issues around it, and then also stealing of like credentials or assets. So there's a lot more coming in this area. And in fact, your question was around how are we designing towns. I'm not sure that there's been a lot of urban planning that's gone into or around how are we going to develop, internet-based economies, but it's starting, right? So I think in the last decade, there's more and more discussion in city halls around smart cities, what that means, what that looks like, who's responsible for what, who's going to pay for what. But I haven't heard yet about too much actual action of like, hey, we're going to design certain communities with this in mind. A lot of it'll probably happen more now, but a lot of it will depend upon, again, where does that internet connection reach and how much physical interaction is actually necessary by people. And so the more the internet connections improve and the security improves, urban planning will become a big deal, because just the same way that we had to plan roads and public transportation, we'll want to plan both internet and communities to take advantage of the technology, right? And so think about this discussion right now. You're probably in the Bay Area right now, in the peninsula, not too far away from me, but you could be in New York, you could be in London, it could be anywhere, right? So there's not the need for us to be physically in the same room is diminishing, and as that diminishes, our dependence on the internet will get bigger and higher, and then potentially there's a redistribution of pricing and of the real estate itself, right? So I think there's a big wave of consideration and discussion that needs to happen on this now.
Well, let's hear. I want to hear about one, the security. Like, what happens? What actually happened when? They always say you got to get good security for your internet. It's like, okay, and you just pay. For me, I pay a service and you get security. Like, what the heck? How does that even work? Like, I know it's probably pretty complicated. Like, how do you stop someone from getting in there? What does security actually do?
Yeah, so there's different dimensions to this, right? There is security on your actual physical machine, right? So you've heard about antivirus software that's been around for a long time. There's also the new term there is, I think, endpoint protection or endpoint detection and response. So that is, hey, you're browsing, malicious websites, or you download something you're not supposed to from the internet, or you plug in, the famous, hey, I found a USB stick on the floor. Let me plug it in and see what's on here. I don't know that a lot of people still do that. I hope not, but I'm sure it happens. And so some of the security really needs to be about awareness and good user behavior. But there are software programs and cloud services that will protect your actual machine from bad code. Now, what does that bad code do, right? Oftentimes you don't necessarily know what's going on, right? It can just kind of hang around in the background and look for opportunity, watch your behavior, right? So there's kind of the spying or privacy invasion, and it's not always malicious, right? There's a lot of web services that are out there which are friendly web services, but they may have access to your personal data. There's a lot of regulation coming in this area as well. We've heard about a lot of social media companies and cloud services that are being restricted or have come under scrutiny for observing and or selling your private data. Then there's code that can sit on your machine that will look for your passwords when you type in your Gmail password, or when you type in your Instacart password or your Amazon password, and then attempt to either use your service, sell that password to somebody else, effectively steal your identity, and then start moving around in your social network or in your whatever that service is, looking for things like credit card numbers, your other email addresses, and start moving across what's called lateral surfing or lateral attacking into potentially your social network or into your professional network, pretending to be Chris, and then potentially compromising other people in your network because, hey, I need, can you give me access to this, or can you give me access to that? So there's a bunch of technology related to your endpoint, your mobile phone or your laptop, to help prevent that. Then there's what iboss does, which is protect that network connection between you and, for example, the Squadcast, or you and Office 365, if you happen to use that, or Salesforce.com, so that nobody else can get into your, literally tapping your feed, right? It's like locking your car when you're getting on the freeway, right? Or getting into the road. Like if you were driving with an unlocked car or an open car on the road, somebody could jump in and grab your stuff and hold you hostage. You want to make sure that connection is secured and locked, so that while the data is moving back and forth between you and whatever service you're using, it's traversing over a bunch of networks. Comcast or Verizon or Wave, the sort of emerging fiber connections. A bunch of service providers that are between you and Amazon, or between you and Salesforce, are also points of infiltration. So you want to have a secure connection. Effectively, it's giving you, you've heard the term VPN, maybe virtual private network.
I'm on one right. Yeah, I use one. Not right now, but during my workday, I do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So VPNs use slightly older technology, but it's a similar outcome that they're trying to get to, which is instead of surfing kind of on the open internet, I'm using a secured connection and creating the conceptual, like a private overlay to the public internet, right? So you're getting kind of you're carving off your little piece of the internet and not allowing anybody else to share or have access to it.
It's so amazing.
It's funny because we talk about these words. I read something great recently, which is if you truly understand something, you can describe what it is without actually naming the name, right?
Yeah.
And it's very, very difficult unless you're in the industry to describe how these things actually work. But in some sense, that's good. When the goodness in that is that we can all, in some sense, take a little bit of this for granted that it has made it into just general consumer vernacular because it works, right? VPNs and more modern technologies like what iboss has is they actually work, and that's good for consumers. It's good for consumers. It's good for business users because we do have then added security in using more internet, and we're more and more dependent on it, right? Like people, if they're stripped away of their mobile phones now, or if you turn off the internet connection from your mobile phone, what are you going to do? We'll be helpless. Now, there's a whole section of the economy that is still very physically oriented, but they're taking direction from a different section of the economy that is more internet connected and internet oriented. So this digital divide is really important to consider in the future. Coming back to your security comment, I think these things are very complicated. There's a lot of magic, but the good news is you don't have to understand how it works to appreciate the outcome it delivers you.
What is your typical client? Who's your typical client? Large businesses? Is it?
Yeah. The company really serves larger and mid-sized enterprises. So a lot of the manufacturers and services that we use in the background, large banking institutions, healthcare institutions, a lot of the retailers that we do business with either online or in the physical brick and mortar world. Retail is a high adopter of our class of technology. Professional services organizations like the legal industry, management consulting, accounting, and finance. So we're seeing traction across the board. I think media and entertainment companies, you hear about hacking or security risk a lot in the media sector, gaming companies. So this is a universal problem. We see more traction in certain industries which are more proactive in security, but it is kind of a universal problem all the way down to the consumer. Right? So I think we have the potential to offer a consumer service in the future. We'll be thinking about that, but right now it's mostly large enterprises.
Now, how is using secure connectivity for a mobile workforce shifting how employers are thinking about offices like now, and and also stretches out like 5-10 years? Where do you think this is going?
Yeah, I think now in today's world, even pre-COVID, but especially accelerated by COVID, it's the fact that we're all, or a good chunk of the economy is working from home. Employers are being forced into making corporate application resource and corporate data available to home users. And while the technology to do that was available before, the internet itself, you could make it available. They weren't doing it because of security risk. So it's forcing them to rapidly adopt more technologies like ours, like iboss's, so that they can stay productive. Right? So I think there's a wave of technology adoption that's happening now and will continue for the next 5 years around or more for this remote workforce security. I think what will happen after that is now that people become used to it, then employers will say, okay, well, I've got the connectivity, or my users have the connectivity wherever they are. The security is in place so that they can use those corporate resources and be productive from home or anywhere outside the office. What do I need an office for?
Yeah.
And that'll force people into thinking, okay, how much of my workforce actually needs to be in the office permanently? And then what is the purpose of the office? Is the office a collaboration point for once a week meetings? Is it a storage facility? Is it a place to come get meals once a week? What is the purpose of this thing? And I think that longer term, we'll see either a reduction in the size of offices or more of a decentralization, maybe, right? So, right now there's this idea of large headquarters and then campuses, maybe some remote branches or campuses in different places. The corporate campus will probably get downsized over time. And then more offices might get popped up more locally to where users are. And that's a big maybe. The WeWork concept, I don't know the internal details of WeWork execution. And unfortunately, companies,
co-working.
Yeah, but this idea of co-working and highly distributed, right? There was, one WeWork office was not ever that huge, right? You might come into some cities where WeWork might have had 3 or 4 floors or a building, but most of the time WeWork and its peer group were maybe a floor or 2 floors in a building and shared by many, many participants. It's like the village concept, right? You kind of come and go and you share with a lot of people, and having them all over the place, right? So location mattered. It wasn't just big cities, but you also wanted it kind of in more suburban areas where people didn't have to commute so far. So this idea of reduction in commute really, really matters, right? So this idea of what's called the edge. In internet words, it's the edge, right? And moving those resources closer to the edge so that you don't have to commute very far. And really, what's the reason to have it, right? Maybe for some spot meetings, or maybe because the internet connection there is better, or the video technology for Zoom or Teams or whatever technology they're using is better. Those would be the reasons to still have those localized offices. But they'll probably become much, much more sharing oriented. Now, when you get into those shared environments, all the more reason that the security is important, right? Because you don't want your neighbor either physically or digitally spying or invading or even accidentally getting into your room or into your device, because you're also sharing your internet connection. Exactly, you're sharing an internet connection, right? The internet connection out of the building from WeWork is a shared internet connection. So all the more reason to have that private networking iboss type solution there. Same thing at home. Like, one of the reasons that home usage needs to be secure, and there's always been fear around it, is because it's a public internet connection. You're sharing it with a bunch of other people in your neighborhood. Ultimately, the connection out your door and out of my door connects with a bunch of other people, if we're living in multi-dwelling units, or just in the neighborhood, right? So if you're on Comcast Xfinity in a certain neighborhood, they all connect to the same pipe at some point. And so that shared connection is what corporates are usually, and rightfully so, worried about, and need to make sure that they can have that controllable security so that shared connection can be utilized without risk.
Yeah.
Right. So going back to your, like, how will employers think about this? I think a lot of employers in the digital economy, especially in the digital economy, will rethink how the distribution of their workforce, the needs for those centralized corporate offices and big campuses. And I predict that there will be, probably not immediately. This will take several years, but a reduction in those large campus sizes, allowing more people to work remotely or from wherever they need to, for as long as they need to, as long as their jobs can be done. And I think that changes the landscape of real estate, period. Commercial real estate, and then subsequently residential, right? If you and I can move out of the Bay Area and do our jobs effectively from anywhere, why do we need to live in the expensive Bay Area, right? Now, there's other benefits. There's ecosystems of other people that you may want to get together with. There are the social human interaction. So I think the big test here is, how much physical interaction do humans actually need, both for business and for social purposes?
Yeah, I mean, this is testing that out, right? I mean, I'm on Zooms all day, and I feel like I'm connected. And you and I are used to kind of working remotely. Like, my headquarters is in New York. We pay a lot of money for this big office space that no one's in right now, and everyone's working from their home. And you work in the Bay Area, and you're headquartered in Boston, and I feel super connected to people. I'm kind of miss seeing them in person. I mean, I'd like to do that a little bit, but like, being on these Zooms, it's a pretty good it's pretty good replacement for that.
Yeah.
And I find I'm surprised how simple it is. Like, We have people who are like older generation in my office, and we're not a technology company. So like, you don't have to be good at technology to be in my what I do. And so we have some people who I was like, oh no, they're just going to be, they're going to be off the map now. You're not going to be able to, they're not going to figure any of this stuff out. And even like my parents, my mom's in her 70s, and I'm like, oh no, she's going to be just like by herself, but they figured it out. I mean, it's really not that hard. It becomes so simple to just get online and connect.
I think Zoom is a good example of a product in which the underlying concept of video collaboration and video conferencing has been around for a long time, right? I mean, a really long time. WebEx is, I think, more than 15 years old, if I remember correctly. And then there's been several, there's GoToMeeting, there's RingCentral, there's a few others, right? Why Zoom?
Yeah.
And Zoom, I think, has just made it really, really easy. So the first wave of technology is always about like, okay, doing something that couldn't be done before. Then it becomes, okay, maybe making it more interoperable with other things or making it lower cost. And then there's a version of it that always is making it really easy and accessible. And that's what Zoom did. It almost made it beautiful, right? Zoom is so easy and almost pleasant to use by comparison to the others that are out there. The installation process, the connection process, it's made for consumers. And I think that's, there's a lot of examples in technology, even the iPhone, right? Why is the iPhone, was it the gold standard in mobility? Is, when there was BlackBerry and the Nokia phones and all that. The iPhone was just a beautiful, easy experience. And that is, I think, the gold standard for product developers is how do I make my thing easy to use, easy to adopt, easy to support. And that is, a lot of what's happening in technology is now being rethought of that, especially because consumer technologies and business technologies are also converging with one another, right? So Zoom used to be an enterprise product. Now it's a consumer product, right? The iPhone was a consumer product. It's also an enterprise product. So the lines between what's consumer and enterprise are also blurring, if not completely disappearing altogether. There's a term, it's called the consumerization of IT. And that is happening, and technology is just becoming pervasive in our lives.
I know. I feel like real technologically savvy that I can do Zoom and I can help people do it. and I'm really bad at technology. So if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Think about like now we just plug things into the wall for electricity. I'm sure there was a time before that to get things powered. Like it was a lot of work to draw electricity into a home or to have all of the different devices and contraptions get powered. And even before that, like we were using, oil and wax and whale fat and things
blubber.
Like that. Yeah.
I'm glad we're beyond the whale blubber stage of technology right now.
Hey, we used to pipe the stuff around, right?
Yeah, the whole whaling, that was a whole industry.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, super interesting. Thank you for helping us all being able to work now. I mean, without guys like you and your company, like we wouldn't be able to work, right? So thank you for keeping the economy going. Are you ready for the hot seat?
What's the hot seat?
The hot seat is sponsored by KK Reset. KK Reset is an HR management and outsourcing consulting firm that specializes in helping organizations to reset their culture, structure, and path. They do this through services which include comprehensive consultation to identify gaps and opportunities for corporate training programs, HR services, and career mapping services. They've collaborated with nonprofit, startups, and academic organizations to protect them from liabilities, reduce turnover, and preserve their brands. They have also collaborated with a number of my clients on the real estate front who are not large enough to have their own in-house HR program, so they outsource it to KK Reset. KK Reset comes in, maybe sits on site a couple days a week, and provides everything you need from an HR perspective for your firm. So it's a great resource for those shops who just maybe doesn't make sense for them to have in-house HR function. So please check them out at kkreset.com, KKRESET.com.
All right. Any books you recommend and/or are reading right now?
Oh, tons of them. I just finished reading Undeniable by Bill Nye. A couple of non-fiction books, Shantaram, The Circle, and Siddharth. Pretty much anything by Yuval Harari, so the Sapiens trilogy, Freakonomics, Black Swan, anything by Nicholas Taleb, Who Stole My Spear, Tribes. I actually wrote this down. Anything by Jeffrey Moore, Steve Blank, Richard Thaler, Steven Pinker, Michael Lewis. I love Michael Lewis stuff, like Moneyball and Liar's Poker and The Big Short. a couple of inspirational books, David Coggins' Can't Hurt Me, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, and then a couple of fun, like sort of businessy and criminal mastermind type books, Billion Dollar Whale, The Mastermind, Surprise, Kill, Vanish, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and Shoe Dog, which is the Phil Knight book for Nike. Just so many. I actually love Audible for audiobooks, and then Blinkist in 12 minutes, which are snippets of books that give you that summaries in like 12 to 15 minutes. They're fantastic.
You turn me on the Blinkist.
Yeah, you like it?
Yeah, I've listened to a couple books so far.
Yeah,
it's great. It's quick. Yeah,
I'm probably doing right now in the range of about 30 to 40 full books a year, and probably about 5 to 10 Blinkists a month.
Can you email me that book list?
You bet.
Cool. Thanks. How about podcast recommendations?
There's one by this guy named Chris Papa,
He's so
TBG.
Handsomest podcaster out there.
I got to tell you, I love podcasts. My favorite one is actually called The Warrior Kid by Jocko. And it's a parent-child version of The Way of the Warrior. And so it's really good for myself and my son together. I have as you know, Veer is 9.5, approaching 10 years old. And we listen to this podcast together. It's about instilling good behaviors, good habits, good work ethic, good principles into our children that they can internalize on their own. Sometimes with parenting, you need a hand. I think that's actually one of the things that we'll have to think about hard in this, in the digital world, is how are we going to parent and raise children with good social values without the social interaction? So something to think about. A few others that I love are Shane Parrish has The Knowledge Project, Hidden Brain by NPR, The Big Idea from BBC, Freakonomics Radio. Andreessen Horowitz has one called A16Z. There's a bunch of good VC podcasts out there from like Greylock and a few others. And then on the spiritual side, Ram Dass has one called Here and Now. And then Krishna Das has one called Pilgrim Heart, which are terrific.
Are you getting on a lot of webinars? I mean, it seems like everyone's doing webinars now. Do you get on any like just webinars to learn stuff right now? I've been trying to kind of keep track of that.
I try to do maybe one a week or so. Today, I just did one this morning or sat in on one this morning that was done by John Sakota from Decibel Venture Partners. He is a former corp dev and ventures guy from Cisco, and I think they're partners in this new venture fund. And he had the founder of Duo Security on, which was acquired by Cisco, also in the cybersecurity space. And it wasn't really about security. It was just more about, hey, founder-to-founder advice on how to either build or grow a company during a crisis era like we're in right now. Really great. It was an hour, a little over an hour. And it was just a terrific, very personable, very easygoing, and actually very insightful. Not a ton of rocket science, and a lot of these webinars don't have it, but I think very thoughtful and articulate and put together ideas that were independent before, and they kind of bring them together and humanize them. So I do try to do, maybe one a week or so if I can, and I do find them very useful. And it also keeps the human interaction going.
Yeah, I like them. I like you can sign up for them, and then they record them. Usually, you can listen to them days later if you want.
Yeah.
What do you like to do outside of work?
Outside of work? What's that? No.
I know.
Well, as you know, I have a family. I'm married with a stepchild, my own child, and then a dog. And so I do really enjoy my family, enjoy spending time at home. And this is probably the most I've been home in the last couple of months, because I used to travel very extensively for work. Yeah. So it's actually been really good for the family. It's been good for my health. I love working out. I'll give a little plug for Peloton. Speaking of the digital age, right? We capitulated and got the Peloton, and it was probably one of the best purchase decisions I've ever made. It's been absolutely fantastic. They have really nailed the digital experience and remote experience for working out, because it's moved beyond the bike into strength training and meditation and yoga and a bunch of other stuff. They've done for working out kind of what Netflix did for movies, which is just make it very easy and kind of a beautiful, rich, engaging experience. Speaking of movies, love movies. Have Amazon Prime, have Netflix, have HBO, have in fact got the Disney Plus. I recommend all of them.
Yeah.
And I think the era that we live in is very much dominated by content. It is just spectacular, the availability. I worked on this video on demand concept more than 10, 15 years ago, and it was really hard. So in a very short period of time, like 10 to 15 years, it's now ubiquitous, and people don't know how it works. It doesn't matter. Back then, people like me, the plumbers of the internet, had to figure out how to make it work and make it accessible. So I do think about that stuff a lot, and we watch a lot of movies in our home. Absolutely love them, both family movies and grown up movies.
Grown-up movies.
Grown-up movies, yeah. The date night.
Are you watching any series? Can you recommend a series? I'm looking for a new series to watch.
Messiah was absolutely spectacular. There was The Mandalorian, has been great. That's on Disney Plus. Dracula was a fun one. Westworld, believe it or not, like I'm not into a lot of series because it's not that I'm not into them. I love the content, but then you're committed, right? Like with limited time in the day, how much am I going to watch? But I got to tell you, jumping into things like Westworld have been really fun, especially because it does highlight a lot of like the futuristic technology stuff that I work on. But yeah, those are a few. I'll send you some more that I think about.
Yeah. Now, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Yeah, I thought about that. I think the number one thing I would tell my 20-year-old self is be kind to yourself, right? And I think many people in the world, period, humanity, like we tend to beat ourselves up. We're pretty self-critical. We're, I think, afraid, but cover that up with things like work and bravado and spending and a bunch of other stuff. Not everybody, and I think it happens a lot in a highly competitive business world too. And so I think, I'd be kind to myself. That's number one. Also be true to myself. Don't worry about pleasing others. Be more true to myself. I fortunately ended up in technology. I started coding and programming when I was a kid, and I took a sharp deviation into the commercial side, which was, it's not bad. It's just, I think I lost touch with my inner sort of technology creator side. And I would have told my 20-year-old self, just don't worry about pleasing other people. Be more true to yourself, and the rest will kind of work itself out. Commit to a path and go down that path. And again, don't worry about what other people think. You're probably just making up a story in your head. And that also, I think it overlaps with the be kind to yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice.
I'm lucky. Things have turned out pretty good for me, so I'm lucky in that respect. But it took a while. It was a zigzag as opposed to a straight line.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now, what do you look for in hiring people? Whether it's technical skill set, obviously is different for every job, but like kind of just like their demeanor, who they are. Like what kind of personality traits do you look for?
Yeah, dependability. Can I count on them? I want to be able to know that they can get the job done, that they'll be honest and transparent with me. Attitude, that's a can-do and curious attitude, and that's also like a genuine attitude, right? No cover-ups and no false bravado necessary. Work ethic, obviously, that matters. That goes back to the dependability thing. I do like working with people and hiring people that have a little bit of a lightheartedness to them and that are easy to work with. It's not a requirement on the lightheartedness side. I think, there's great people who can execute that are very serious. But I do think that, life can be tough. Work and business is very, very competitive, and having a slightly lighthearted demeanor and being able to have a high work ethic and execute just makes it easier to work together as a team.
Yeah. How do people find you or get a hold of you?
LinkedIn. So it's linkedin.com/in/Nikesh Kalra. You can always find me there. Also on Facebook, also on Instagram, and through you.
Yeah, come to me. I'm happy to put you in touch with them. Nikesh, I've known you for years. I've learned a lot through this conversation. I really appreciate that. So thanks for sharing your story with us. And
it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Keeping us connected.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Stay connected, stay clean, stay safe, stay secure.
Yeah, stay secure. All right, man. Thanks so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, Chris. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the TBG Real Estate Podcast. Please visit us online at tbg-realestate.com or on Instagram at tbg.realestate. Until next time, have a great week.